She always believed her grandparents vanished without a trace in 1979. Until a strange key hidden inside an old clock led her to a sealed train car. Inside, she found a journal, a transmitter, and the truth about herself. But some signals were never meant to be heard again. It started with a box. Not a letter. Not a phone call. Just a cardboard box, worn soft at the corners, waiting on the porch of a small 2-bedroom rental outside Asheville, North Carolina. Ella Greer didn't expect mail that morning. Certainly not a box that heavy, sitting beneath the overhang like it belonged there. No label, no sender. Just her name, Ella, handwritten in the neat, slanted cursive no one used anymore. She glanced around. The cul-de-sac was still, no trucks. No footsteps on the sidewalk. Just that box. Just her name. Ella bent, pulled it inside, and opened it on the kitchen counter, her hands trembling not with fear, but something stranger. The kind of instinct that makes you hold your breath before you even know why. Inside was something, wrapped in thick cloth. She tugged at the layers, and then paused. It was a clock. An old one, wooden, with a rounded top, faded brass hands, and a small cracked glass pane. The kind you'd see on a fireplace mantel in black and white movies, and it was familiar. Her heart started pounding in a way that made no sense at all, because she'd seen this clock before, in photos her mom kept tucked in a cedar box, photos she never liked to talk about. Photos of Ella's grandparents, Ruth and Thomas Greer, the couple who vanished in 1979 and were never seen again. Ella hadn't been born yet. Her mother was only 14 when it happened. One moment, Ruth and Thomas were packing up their Buick for a weekend at their cabin outside Boone. The next, gone. No note, no wreck, no trace. For decades, the family had whispered theories: a car accident, a secret affair, even the occasional rumor of witness protection, but no bodies, no evidence. Just absence. And now, their mantel clock, the one in every photo, had arrived on Ella's porch without a word. She stared at it for what felt like minutes. Then she turned it over, hoping for some kind of message, a tag, anything. Instead, she found a strange gap underneath, where a panel looked like it had once been screwed in and then forced out. Inside the hollow space, something clicked against the wood. She tipped the clock slightly, and a key fell out. Tiny, rusted, tied with old thread to a note. The ink almost faded to nothing. Ella unfolded the yellowed slip of paper and squinted. Forgive. U.S. Start with the seller. Her fingers went cold. There was no return address. No handwriting matched to anything she knew. Just those 5 words in the key. She called her mother. Mom, did you send me something? A clock? Silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. What kind of clock? Her mother asked. Ella hesitated. It looks like the one from your old pictures. The one that used to sit behind Grandpa when he played the piano. Another pause. A long one. That clock was buried with them, her mother whispered. Ella didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, the clock in front of her, watching the second hand twitch in jerky movements, like it was counting something invisible. By morning, she had a decision. The note had said, start with the seller. But Ella didn't have one. She only had vague memories of visiting the old family cabin when she was 5. The last time her mother ever took her, a log place tucked in the hills. She remembered warm wood smells, dusty light, the tiny red armchair. In the corner, that cabin was abandoned now. After the investigation, no one in the family wanted to go back. It had changed hands a few times, but rumor was no one stayed long. Ella didn't care. By noon, she'd packed a bag, left a note for her roommate, and gassed up her old Toyota. The cabin was 4 hours away, up near the state line. Her hands shook the entire drive. As she pulled into the long-forgotten gravel road, weeds scraping at her doors, A strange stillness settled over her. The cabin came into view, worn, weathered, windows clouded with dust, but the door wasn't locked. Inside, it looked nearly untouched, like someone had meant to return but never did. The clock's twin had sat on the mantel once, now gone. Ella stood in the quiet, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. She found the cellar door in the pantry. It hadn't been obvious. Tucked behind a false panel, sealed with a hook that looked newer than the rest of the house. She unlocked it with the key. The door groaned open, revealing stairs descending into darkness, and something else, a faint humming, like an old machine, turning on slowly, as if it had been waiting for someone to come back. The key had turned so easily. Too easily. Ella stood at the top of the cellar stairs, clutching a flashlight with one hand and the antique clock in the other. Her breath hung in the stale air like something waiting to be swallowed. The humming was real, faint, electrical, somewhere deep below. It didn't match the rest of the cabin, which felt dead, frozen in time, like a house that hadn't been touched in decades. But the cellar felt different. She took the first step. It creaked beneath her weight, but held. Dust swirled up, catching in the flashlight beam like fog. The air grew colder with each foot down. 8 steps. 10. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight landed on concrete, uneven, cracked, stained in places with what might have been old water damage. The walls were stone, and the temperature had dropped enough to make her shiver. To her left, shelves with glass jars filled with dark, unidentifiable preserves. Most sealed, a few cracked. Cobwebs tangled in corners. To her right, an old furnace, and a tangled mess of wires that looked far too new to have been installed in the 1970s. And straight ahead, a steel door. Ella stepped closer. It was built into the stone foundation, flush with the wall, and it had a keypad. She blinked. Not a lock, not a latch, a modern electronic keypad, with glowing red numbers and a blinking light. What the hell? She reached toward it, then froze. Something about the setup felt wrong. Too clean. Too deliberate. Whoever had installed this hadn't been part of the original cabin's design. This was hidden, and recently, the humming was coming from behind. The door. Ella backed up, heart pounding. She scanned the cellar again. Nothing about it matched what she remembered from that one childhood visit. It was supposed to be just a place for old wine and maybe a few tools. Not this. She turned and climbed back up the stairs, locking the cellar behind her. She needed help. Ella didn't call the police. Not yet. She drove into Boone, to a small cafe, with Wi-Fi and a window seat facing the mountains. With her laptop open and coffee untouched, she searched everything she could about her grandparents' disappearance again. Same articles, same forum threads, same unanswered questions, but one detail stood out now, something she'd never noticed before. A local paper had run a story in 1984, 5 years after they vanished, about a man claiming to have seen something strange near the Greer cabin. The article quoted him saying, "They were building something, or hiding it, I don't know. It wasn't natural." The man's name, Russell Dyer, age 41 in 1984. Ella searched his name. Nothing current. But then she tried obituary records. He died in 1996, but the article listed his surviving daughter, Lydia Dyer, still living in Boone. Ella found her on Facebook. And messaged her. "Hi, I'm Ella Greer. I believe your father may have witnessed something connected to my grandparents' disappearance in 1979. If you're open to talking, I'm in Boone today. I'll keep it brief, I promise." She didn't expect a response, but 10 minutes later, Lydia replied, "My father never let it go. He said people thought he was crazy, but he knew what he saw. I'll meet you. 2 p.m. at the library." Lydia was in her late 50s, sharp eyes, soft voice. She carried a thin folder with her, clutched tightly like it might blow away. He used to talk about it more near the end, Lydia said as they sat in a quiet corner of the public library. Said he saw your grandfather arguing with a man outside the cabin. Said there were boxes, big ones, being moved into the woods. Then, a week later, your grandparents were gone. Ella leaned in. Did he say who the man was? No name. But he drew this. She slid a paper across the table. A sketch. Sloppy but intense. It showed a tall man in a suit standing beside what looked like a radio tower, with wires running down into the ground. Dad said they were building something. Lydia added, not just storing. He said your grandfather looked scared. Ella stared at the drawing dot, then pulled the clock from her bag. Lydia went still. Where did you get that? She asked. Ella hesitated. It arrived at my house 3 days ago, with a note and a key. The key unlocked the cellar at the cabin. And down there's a steel door with a keypad. Lydia paled. My dad once told me, she said slowly, that if anything ever came back, a letter, an object, anything from them, I should tell the family to find the frequency. Ella looked up sharply. What does that mean? Lydia shook her head. He never explained. Just said they'll hear it if they're patient enough. That night, Ella returned to the cabin. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't think of anything else. She sat with the clock again. Turned it over. Stared at the hollow where the key had been. Then something occurred to her. She unscrewed the back completely. Behind the mechanism, tucked deep inside the cavity, was something else. A sliver of rolled paper. Ella used tweezers to extract it. Carefully, breath-shallow dot, it was a piece of graph paper, with numbers written across it like a spreadsheet. At the top, one word, frequency. Below it, a sequence of times. Each entry began with 2:17 a.m. The same time, repeated over 7 nights. The rest looked like signal coordinates or transmission logs. But there was no context. She checked the clock's old wind-up mechanism. The second hand was jammed. At exactly 2:17, not random, a time, a signal, a schedule. And the next 2:17 a.m. was only hours away. At 2:15 a.m., Ella stood in the cellar again. Steel door in front of her. The red blinking keypad waiting. She opened her phone and dialed the first frequency code from the paper into a radio app. A soft static filled the room. Then something flickered. The keypad light shifted from red to amber. Then green. The lock clicked. The steel door opened inward, and behind it, in the cold blackness, a corridor, lined with wire. Shelves, old speakers, and a red light pulsing in. The distance like a heartbeat. Ella stepped through, and the door closed behind her. The door closed behind Ella with a heavy finality. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way it sealed, airtight. She turned instinctively, but the handle was gone. On this side, it was flush metal, no knob, no mechanism. Just smooth, cold. Steel. Her breath caught. She raised her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls lined with thick cabling. Coiled wires, dusty racks, and radio equipment lined one side of the narrow corridor. Some of it looked newer, replaced over time. Other parts were relics from the 1970s, their knobs faded. Labels yellowed and cracked, and there it was again, the humming. Only now it was stronger, coming from deeper inside. The corridor bent left. Ella stepped lightly, every creak of the floor beneath her boots echoing like a gunshot. The air smelled of iron and mildew. And beneath it all, something faintly chemical. As she turned the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. At the far end of the room, under a red emergency light, sat a man, or what used to be one. He was seated in a steel chair bolted to the ground, slumped forward. Skeletal remains, clothes decayed. What was once a collared shirt clung to bone and dust. Wires ran from his wrists to the table beside him, and on the table, a small, still glowing radio transmitter. Analog, ancient. The frequency display read 217. Ella's stomach turned. She stumbled back, hand to her mouth. Then something. Click. A reel-to-reel recorder on a side shelf suddenly whirred to life. It began playing a tape. Slowly, with a stutter, as if triggered by motion. Ella watched frozen as the reel spun and a man's voice filled the air. If this reaches anyone. This is Gerald Greer. I was wrong. They lied. I should never have built it. They're listening through the wires. They said we'd never be found, but I had to try. Ella's heart stopped. Gerald Greer. Her grandfather. The voice continued. Broken, raspy. They said it was only for communication. That it would let us reach beyond the range. But it wasn't just signal. It was a door. They didn't tell me what was on the other side. Static. I don't know where Lillian is. They separated us. She was screaming when they took her down the tunnel. I think she knew too much. I left this recording in case someone made it back. The tape ended in a shriek of static. Then silence. Ella stood frozen. Her grandfather had been alive after 1979. He hadn't vanished. He'd been imprisoned. In this room, forced to transmit. Something. The radio transmitter's light flickered again. This time, it emitted a long, steady tone. From behind her, a panel in the wall clicked and slid open. Another passage. The hallway beyond was narrow, lined with what looked like insulation and rusted electrical conduits. More wires. More silence. It sloped downward, deeper underground. Ella hesitated, then stepped forward. The floor turned from concrete to dirt. Tree roots cracked through the walls. It smelled older here, untouched for decades. The tunnel was barely wide enough to stand straight. She followed it for what felt like 20 minutes before it opened into a chamber. This time it wasn't radio equipment. It was documents. Rows of filing cabinets, binders, maps, all labeled with numbers and call signs. Ella pulled open one drawer at random. Inside were pages of surveillance records, handwritten logs, photographs of people she didn't know, some circled in red. A log entry stood out. Subject G. Greer. Refused transmission on the 4th of July 1980. Isolated from partner, L. Greer. Reassigned to chair B4. Next page. Subject L. Greer. Attempted escape through tunnel. 6. Apprehended. Silence protocol initiated. Ella's knees buckled. She sat on the cold floor. Her grandparents hadn't disappeared. They'd been captured. And whatever this place was, it wasn't just a bunker. It was a program, a long-running, hidden operation, possibly government, possibly rogue, but hidden beneath a cabin, under their name. Y. She pulled out a map from one of the filing cabinets. It showed a radio tower network, stretching across North Carolina, Virginia, and parts of Tennessee, all centered around one labeled Greer Site A. The cabin. Ella's phone buzzed suddenly. No signal, just a notification from an unknown source. One line of text. They know you're here. She dropped the phone. In the distance, somewhere back toward the tunnel, she heard a sound. A faint click, followed by a distant boot scrape on concrete. Someone else was down here. Ella didn't breathe. The sound, that unmistakable scrape of a boot on concrete, echoed from the corridor behind her. She backed away from the filing cabinets, eyes scanning for an exit. The room was deep underground, sealed on 3 sides with rusted steel and reinforced concrete. There was no door, only the tunnel she had come from, and now, someone or something was in that tunnel. She reached for her flashlight. Her fingers trembled as she dimmed the beam. Quietly, she slid behind one of the cabinets and crouched, heart pounding so loudly she swore it might give her away. The tunnel filled with silence. Not emptiness, that kind of loaded silence that crackled with presence. A breath, a step, a pause. Then came a second noise, a soft static, a hum. Transmitter back in the room, the one connected to her grandfather's body, had activated again. Not with a voice this time, but with numbers, a slow, deliberate series of tones. Mechanical, almost robotic. 2, 5, 7, 9, 0. Pause. 2, 5, 7, 9, 0. The same string repeating. Over and over. Ella didn't recognize the pattern, but it felt deliberate. Like a code being broadcast. She slowly slipped the map she'd found earlier into her jacket. Along with one of the labeled photos, a woman's face circled in red, and a small journal marked Greer Bunker Activity, 1980. Then she ran. Not blindly, she retraced her steps through the corridor, past the skeletal remains of her grandfather, and toward the door that had sealed behind her. But now, the wall where the door once stood was gone. It had closed entirely. No seam, no panel, just solid wall. She pounded it once, no sound beyond her side. Whatever had locked her in here was no ordinary mechanism. Suddenly behind her, footsteps again. This time quicker, confident, not echoing. Near. Ella bolted down the side corridor. She hadn't noticed earlier. A maintenance path with narrow steel ladders lining the walls. One led upward, toward a narrow shaft with blinking red lights. She climbed. Hand over hand, breath catching in her throat, the radio signal still echoing softly through the walls. 2, 5, 7, 9, 0. At the top, a hatch. Ella pushed. It didn't budge. She pushed harder. Finally, it creaked open, spilling daylight into her eyes. She scrambled out. She was in the woods. Not far from the Greer cabin, but nothing looked familiar. The trees here were thicker, wilder, untouched. She turned in a slow circle, then froze. About 50 feet away, half concealed under brush and camouflage netting, was a squat concrete structure. A radio tower extended upward from it. Not tall, just tall enough to peek over the tree line. It looked like a utility station, the kind only forest rangers or utility workers might know about. On the side of the building, faint letters had been spray painted in black, NSO5. Ella stared. She'd seen this before, on the map in the tunnel. It was one of several marked locations. Enza. Number station. She slowly approached. No sign of movement. But the door was cracked open. Inside, an eerie green light glowed from a series of analog dials and a dusty terminal screen. On the wall, a board filled with time codes and corresponding names. The handwriting was shaky, almost as if written under duress. She read, L. Greer, code 509, last transmit, the 4th of July 1980, silenced, G. Greer, code 503, last transmit, the 11th of August 1980, silenced, and then, at the bottom, a fresh entry, added in red, unknown intrusion detected, E. Greer, initiate reclamation protocol. Ella stepped back. They knew she was here. They had a name for her, and they were tracking her. Suddenly, the static from the wall-mounted radio shifted. A woman's voice came through, old, warped, but unmistakably clear. Ella, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I tried to warn you. They're still alive in the wires. Ella's jaw clenched. It was her grandmother's voice, but then the voice continued, distorted, repeating the same words, over and over, too perfectly, too mechanically, like a recording triggered by presence. The voice wasn't speaking to her. It was warning someone else. The lights in the room flickered. From outside, the chirping of birds stopped. And in the trees, no more than 20 feet from the station, a figure stood motionless in the foliage, wearing an old ranger's uniform, but the badge was blacked out, and in his hand was a receiver. Ella didn't run. She couldn't. Not yet. The man in the ranger uniform hadn't moved. He stood motionless under the trees like part of the landscape, one hand clutching an old receiver, the other brushing the side of his jacket. Ella slowly backed away from the doorway of number station 05, every instinct screaming to flee. But something about him felt wrong. His uniform was clean, too clean, like it had never seen weather or dirt. The badge was blank. No name, no agency. And his face, half in shadow, looked strangely featureless. Pale, unblinking. She turned and slipped back into the structure, closing the heavy steel door behind her and flipping the manual lock. The hum of the equipment continued around her. Lights blinked. Low static crackled, and from a rusted panel at the back, she could hear a faint ticking dot. It was a time delay broadcast console, the kind used to relay pre-recorded messages at scheduled intervals. She traced a dusty wire from the console to the wall and followed it to a locked metal box with a cassette deck. There was already a tape inside, labeled in thick red pen, "Initiate Protocol 19. Do not remove." Ella pressed play. There was a click. Then silence. Then a woman's voice, slightly warped, slightly mechanical. July 14th, 1980. If you're hearing this, it means they've activated the final sequence. My name is Greer. I was part of the system. I didn't mean to be. I just followed my husband. Ella froze. The voice continued. We were lured in. Told it was a Cold War surveillance program. Numbers, signals, emergency readiness. But they lied. It wasn't about Russia. It wasn't about communication. It was about containment. There were others, children, women, people who went missing and were never found. Not because they ran. Because they were taken, absorbed. Ella's throat tightened. The number stations weren't broadcasting codes. They were filters. They scanned for patterns. Voices that weren't supposed to exist anymore. If you heard them, you were already part of it. Gordon tried to stop it. He broke into this site, NS05, and rerouted the frequency. That's when they came for him. A pause, then softly, shakily. I was already gone by then. Ella shut the tape off. A sharp crack echoed from outside. She moved to the slit window, careful to stay out of sight. The man in the ranger uniform was gone, but his receiver had been placed on the ground right where he stood. Still blinking, still active. Ella stepped out, heart racing. She moved carefully to the device, kneeling beside it. It was old, pre-digital, but modified. There were small soldered components that didn't belong in 1980s tech. She turned. A knob. Static. Then a whisper. She raised it to her ear. And froze. It was her own voice. Not Lev. Not now. A recording from earlier that day, when she had been in the tunnel, breathing, moving, whispering. The device had been recording her the entire time. She dropped it. Suddenly, static exploded in her ear again, louder this time, and paired with a low-frequency pulse. It hit her like a wave, knocking her off balance. For a moment, the trees spun. Then she saw it, a visual, brief, burned into her mind like a dream you wake up from and swear was real. A cold concrete room. A wall lined with radios. A girl, maybe 9 years old, sitting on the floor, knees to chest, whispering numbers into a tape recorder. And behind her, a man in a Greer logging jacket, staring blankly at the wall, mouth moving without sound. Then blackness. Ella opened her eyes. The vision was gone. But something had changed. The receiver, now cracked, was silent. The forest around her eerily quiet. She looked down at her hand. Blood, a small cut along her palm, where the metal casing had split. She stood. But before she could decide what to do next, she heard something behind her, a child's voice. You're not supposed to be here. Ella turned. A young girl stood on the edge of the woods. Wearing a 1970s-style dress, barefoot, pale, and in her hands, a rusted tape recorder, the kind used in old number stations. Ella stepped forward. Who are you? The girl didn't answer. She just pointed to the trees, then whispered, "They're still listening," and vanished. Not ran. Not walked away. Gone. Like a flicker of memory erased too soon. Ella stared at the spot for a long time before she finally moved. She picked up the broken receiver, slipped the protocol tape into her jacket, and walked toward the trees where the girl had pointed. There, half hidden in the undergrowth, she found another hatch, smaller, with the symbol NSO2 etched faintly into the side. Another number station. Another door, and maybe this time, more answers. Ella stared at the hatch labeled NS-02. It looked older than the first station, rusted hinges, moss-covered seams, and a handle that felt brittle under her grip. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but a deeper knowing that whatever was behind this door would change everything. She pulled. The hatch groaned, and the forest went still. Inside, the stairs descended steeply, concrete crumbling beneath her boots. The scent of mildew and age coated the air like dust in a forgotten attic. But this station was different. No humming, no blinking lights, only silence. At the bottom of the stairs, the room opened into a control chamber, stripped bare. Wires dangled like vines from broken panels. Shelves sat empty, and in the center, a single chair bolted to the floor faced a cracked wall of one-way glass. On the chair, a coil of wire headphones, a notebook, and a faded photograph taped to the glass. Ella stepped closer. It was a picture of a man and woman, standing in front of a red truck, young, happy, familiar. Her grandparents, Gordon and Laura Greer, summer of 1976. But behind them in the photo, just barely visible, was this building. Station NSO2. They'd been here before. She opened the notebook. The pages were brittle. Ink bled into paper. July 17, 1981. 12 a.m. Window opened. Voice transmission lasted 1 minute 22 seconds. Message unclear. Origin. Inconsistent. Containment failed. Another entry. August 3rd. Static patterns repeating again. Not broadcast. Internal generation. Ella heard it too. Her heart stopped. Ella. Her name. In handwriting that matched the note inside the clock. She flipped the page. They told US we couldn't have children. But Laura, she did. They took her from us, erased the memory. But I remember the cries. I remember the night the light went out. And I remember the voice in the dead air window. Ella stepped back. Could they have had a child? One no one ever spoke about? Another knock. This time not on the door, but inside. Her ear. She yanked back. The old headphones had slipped over her shoulder as she read. One earpiece now buzzed with a pulsing static. And inside it, a voice. Ella, come to the window. She turned. The one-way glass flickered. Then, for the briefest second, it blinked back. It wasn't glass. It was a monitor, the surface blurred. Like a screen out of phase, then cleared. On the other side, a long hallway, gray, fluorescent lights flickering. And in the middle, a man, still, older, wearing the same Greer logging jacket from 1979. It was Gordon. Her grandfather. He raised his hand, not to wave, but to press something on the wall. The lights behind him dimmed. A warning buzzer sounded. Containment protocol breach. Window open. The screen went black. Ella staggered back. Lights in her station suddenly flared. Not power lights, but red emergency STROB. And from somewhere deep beneath the station, machinery began to stir. Something was waking up. She ran up the stairs, out into the open forest air. And froze. The sky had darkened. The sun hadn't moved. It was still midday, but a veil had crept over the forest. Like fog, but thicker, heavier. Radio static buzzed faintly in the distance. Her receiver, still in her coat, blinked again. A new frequency had begun broadcasting. Not numbers. Not code. Just a single message, over and over. Welcome back, Ella. She stepped into the clearing, heart racing, and saw the girl again. The barefoot child in the 1970s dress. This time, standing beside an open train car, half sunken into earth and moss. Its rusted door swung wide, revealing a sealed chamber inside, carved. Along the inside metal wall, illuminated by a beam of soft light. Ella, they tried to save you. Now you have to finish it. And below that, the same handwriting. The same hand that wrote the message inside the antique clock. Dead air ends at 0. Don't stay when the silence breaks. The girl stepped back, and the tape recorder in her hand clicked. The girl in the 1970s dress stood completely still, eyes unblinking. As the tape recorder in her hand clicked again, Ella didn't move. The silence between them buzzed louder than any broadcast. The forest around them, once rich with birdsong and breeze, was now muted, like sound was absorbed by the fog. And then the tape played. Not a child's voice, but her grandfather's. Ella, you were never meant to find this place alone. But if you're hearing this, something went wrong. Something opened. The girl tilted her head slowly. Her face flickered, not electronically, but like memory fading. A face not hers. But maybe Laura single quotes S. Ella stepped forward, voice shaking. What happened to you? What happened to them? The child didn't answer, but the train car did. A low hum began vibrating from inside the sealed chamber. Her pocket receiver blinked, not in rhythm now, but in pulse. Like a heartbeat. She entered the train car. The metal door closed behind her without a sound. Inside, the walls were lined with strange artifacts, blueprints, maps, tangled wire. Old military manuals, but in the center was a control panel with one rotary dial and a single switch labeled Return Signal. Do not activate without code. Beside it, burned into a metal plate, NS-79, Containment Transport. In transit July 14, 1979. Final entry point, sealed. Ella turned the dial. Frequencies hissed through static. She passed 88.9, then 104.7, then something between the bands. A void. And from that void came a sound. Not voices, cries, children, a woman calling out. Man's final whisper. She's still ours. Ella slammed the dial back. The receiver flared. And from it came a new voice, her own, but younger. A memory she never had. Mama said the clock's broken. But I hear it tick sometimes. A jolt went through her. She remembered something, or someone, holding her during a storm. Hands not her parents. A voice whispering lullabies. Not in this time. And then, the church, the station. A flash. The lights. The window. And then, nothing. She opened the journal beside the panel. A final entry. July 14, 1979. Transport failed. Gordon and Lavra refused to hand her over. We sealed them in the window to protect the frequency. The child was extracted, but memory suppression incomplete. Subject designation, Ella. Ella dropped the book. They'd taken her. Her entire life had been built on a lie. She wasn't just related to Gordon and Lavra. She was their daughter. Hidden, moved, raised under new names and forgotten. Memories. The antique clock hadn't just been a relic. It had been a message. A breadcrumb trail home. The girl reappeared outside the train car. Only now. She looked older, almost like a mirror. Same cheekbones. Same chin. A silent echo of who Ella could have been, had time not fractured. The tape clicked one last time. If the return signal fails, if Ella ever finds this, tell her we never stopped listening. Ella turned to the control panel. Her hands hovered over the switch. She could walk away. Forget this. Let the past stay buried. Or she flipped the switch. World went silent. No birds. No wind. No breath. Only the hum of the panel growing louder. And then, the sky cracked, not like thunder, but like a transmission tearing open. A final signal burst across every channel, not just radio, but memories, frequencies, time itself. Somewhere, far off, inside a hidden mountain relay, a red light blinked on for the first time in 44 years. And in a sealed observation room, two figures stirred behind glass, frail, pale, but alive. Gordon and Lavra Greer, eyes opening, faces lifting. As the monitor lit up with one word, return signal received. In the woods, Ella collapsed to her knees, and behind her, the voice on the tape whispered one last time, "She made it."